And this presentation is going to be designed to give you a good understanding of what I mean when I even talk about critical thinking. Critical thinking can be any number of things to some of you, but to us, it involves asking questions designed to help you get to the logical conclusion or the logical truth. Critical thinking is a process through which we seek to find truth and factual evidence to support a claim. Now, by the way, I don't usually read all the lines of a slide. I'm doing this for accessibility purposes, so I'm going to try to keep it down to only what I really need to read. But it might help you to go through these presentations from time to time. I'm also going to leave the entire PowerPoint presentation up in the Files section of Canvas, so you can download it and play it anytime you wish to get information. Some of these questions may be on your midterm, so when we get close to the midterm, I'll tell you what to look for and where to go, but it's good to have these available. Critical thinking, it's how we decide what to believe through a use of logic, through a use of our cognition, through the use of applying logic to an analysis program. Note, we can decide to believe other ways, but basically, I want to focus on the purpose of logic in critical thinking. Now, it's a process that has its foundations in the teachings of Socrates. And when I say in the teachings of Socrates, he actually came up with many years ago a process of questioning of how to get to certain truths. And when we look at Socratic questioning methods, you'll see that there are several different types of questions designed to get you several different types of answers. So we're going to go through that in great detail. We'll look at this questioning, and basically the biggest question we're going to ask you all semester is, why should I believe you? I'm asking you that question because you're going to make a claim. That claim is going to have a lot of impact to your essay, and when you make that claim, such as Black Lives Do Matter, I'm going to say to you, why should I believe that? And you're going to have to come up with some evidence that convinces me and your readers why Black Lives do matter, if that happened to be the topic of the essay. So why don't we think critically? Why are we just sitting out here just going along with the crowd all the time? Well, it's a process of having been indoctrinated into that, having been kind of since birth, we've been told what to think, we've been told what to believe, and we eventually get to the point where everybody thinks and believes a lot of the same things, and so we go along with the crowd, kind of like fish swimming upstream. We're too willing to buy what everybody's selling us in ads, in politics, in religion, in all different kinds of things. We kind of feel more comfortable when we just go along with popular belief or what everybody seems to believe. It's easier, it's much easier, and it's also natural to go along with popular thinking. So we don't want to upset things. We don't want people to be, what are you talking about? Are you kind of a heretic or something? And so we usually don't go along or don't fight going along with popular thinking. But we also don't need to defend our position if we go along with popular thinking. If everybody thinks the same way and we say, yeah, I agree, that doesn't involve needing to defend that position. But if everybody thinks in one direction and we decide to go in the other direction, people are going to look at us and say, why do you think that? Why do you feel that way? Kind of give me a little bit of understanding. Or they may even challenge you and say, oh yeah, prove it. Prove it. So there are a lot of problems caused by just going along with the crowd. I mean, it seems like an easier thing to do, but guess what? There's a lot of negativity going along with that, and it can be surprising sometimes. So in any given internet search, we can find a wide variety of expert advice, and you know that yourself. Each one of them totally contradicting the other. For example, there's a crackpot methods of curing the common cold. One says use a neti pot. Another one says take this medicine. Another one says don't go outside without a hat on. Another one says, put cinnamon in your tea, or, crazy things that people talk about. None of them work, by the way, but a lot of people believe in them. They sometimes call them old wives' tales, which is a silly thing to say, but that's a common thing to say. So there are other things, like Uncle Joe gave me some great advice on where to invest my money. And I believed Uncle Joe because he's a nice guy. He knows what he's talking about. And now Uncle Joe and I are both broke because he was wrong. I should have maybe checked his credentials a little bit better. One real big, glaring, scary example of going along with the crowd is QAnon. Now, if any of you are followers of QAnon, I'm going to tell you up front that I'm not. I'm also going to tell you up front that I'm going to use it as an example of a negative. If that offends you, let me know. But in the meantime, QAnon's a pretty glaring example of how bad things can get because people decided to go along with the crowd. So QAnon, as you know, basically is a group, is a belief system, and there's someone that I guess they revere or look up to or wait for word from that they call Q, and they've got logos with Q all over it. And basically, some of the beliefs that I've read about, and I'm not sure that I'm even getting this right, so I probably shouldn't say it, but some of the beliefs are that they believe that the Democratic followers are pedophiles and that they're kidnapping children. I guess there was some incident that was reported in a Washington, D.C. pizza parlor where they went in and somebody actually tried to kill somebody else, or actually did, I'm not sure, because they thought they were rescuing children that were theoretically kidnapped by the Democrats. It also is a group that believes that all of this is, there's a deep state out there on the internet and in the world, and that deep state does things behind our backs. And on one side, you've got all of the people who want to do away with Trump and conservative beliefs, and on the other side, you have a lot of people who are trying to protect what they believe to be facts as well. So it's a very, very dicey, tension-filled kind of a thing that's all based on rhetoric, all based on words. No factual evidence has been presented. Now, quite frankly, I went through all 10 of the videos for this QAnon organization just to see if there was any kind of factual basis of it, and there was none that I could find. Doesn't mean there wasn't any, it means I couldn't find any. And I went back to the person who referred me to it and I said, you know, I'm trying, I really went into this with an open mind, and I watched all the videos, and I haven't found anything that's based on factual evidence. Can you give me any examples of factual evidence? And she said, well, you have to believe, which told me pretty much right off the bat, this is all based on going along with the crowd, going along with what a bunch of people are saying. Well, here's what it led to. It, in part, led to the attack on our Capitol on January 6th, where thousands and thousands of people, many of whom are Q followers, kind of attacked our Capitol building, and some were even trying to take captives. Some of the representatives and senators were supposedly targeted in this, and they were trying to literally take over the government because, theoretically, because they were told that that Joe Biden's stolen, what they called this, he stole the election, stolen election was about to be ratified by the Senate, and they were going to install him as the President of the United States. And these folks definitely were going to do something about it. 5 people died. Many, many, many people got injured severely. I won't go into all the details. You've seen it all over the news. So all of this was based on rhetoric, was based on a story, was based on non-factual, non-evidence that people were putting out there, and it took hold and it gathered steam and it became something that just couldn't be stopped. It was a train rolling downhill. So is there a problem in just going along without checking the evidence? I think so. I think so. Anyhow, this isn't about QAnon, this isn't about my beliefs, this isn't about political stories. This is about just how strong the need to gather evidence before we believe a claim can be. So simply going along with the experts will often result in you winding up somewhere you didn't want to go. Well, why does that happen also? Well, some people give us what we think might be factual, but they don't give you all the facts. They give you what we call a half-truth. People trying to sell us inexpensive clothing don't usually tell us that they're made by slave laborers in sweatshops in Asia or some third world country. Nice shirt, really well made, real cheap, good stuff. They don't tell you the backstory there. Drug manufacturers point to how many tests that they've done and how many trials that they've put their drug through, and they usually don't tell you that they paid for those tests and those trials, so they could be suspect just based on that, but they tell you half the truth. Experts are not often unbiased, and we should question their authority every single time. Just going along with the crowd is also called System 1 thinking, and that's an actual psychological phrase. System 1 thinking is where we accept a claim without question. Somebody makes a claim, we accept it, and we just go with it. We don't have time, we don't have the means to investigate. The facts just don't happen to come out, and we don't expose a false claim. It's just easier to go along. So problems arise when the claim is totally false and we've relied on it as being completely true. That's where we get into real trouble. So how do we counter System 1 brain? Well, System 1 brain leads to incorrect thinking. It's fast, it's automatic, and it's typically controlled by our emotions. Those three items cause us to go along with the crowd too often, too easily. Fast, automatic, and controlled by emotions. We have to rely on our own minds. We have to rely on our cognitive ability to get to some form of the truth. We have to assert rational control over our beliefs and conclusions. We have alternatives to being mental slaves to whoever impresses our System 1 brain. And so when we say it's controlled by emotions, appeal to emotion is a very strong way people advertise. As you know, I will give you a really good example that's just been all over TV. It's the puppy dog syndrome, where you have Sarah from Canada, whatever her name is, singing a sad, sad song, and puppy dogs out in the freezing cold, shaking and their bones sticking out and their sad eyes, and it's just all very, very sad, and it's designed to get you to give them money. I won't tell you how much of the money actually goes to helping the animals as opposed to what goes into the advertising, but there's a lot more going into advertising than goes into helping the animals. So it's based on our emotions. It's fast and it's automatic because we have knee-jerk reactions built right into our thinking. Our knee-jerk reactions say that somebody said it, I believe that person, that's an authority, that's a person with MD after their name, it's a person that I've heard in the past, so I'm going to believe whatever he or she tells me. Automatic, fast, based on emotions. So critical thinking is how we get out of this. It's an awareness of a set of interrelated critical questions. Of course, those critical questions are mostly the Socratic type questioning, but it's a set of interrelated critical questions that give us the ability to ask and answer in an appropriate manner to get to the truth, and we have the desire to use those critical questions. Now that desire thing is pretty important. So let's say we have these questions, we have this awareness that those questions are out there, and we have the ability to ask and answer those questions in an appropriate manner. That sometimes involves being clever enough, that sometimes involves having enough practice that you decide you're going to do it, and I'm asking the question, well, why should I believe that? I'm asking it maybe in a way that is designed to get me the right answer. I might ask a question that says, well, you know, you say this, but if you do that, what happens here and what happens there? And is that going to happen in every particular case, or are there some unusual situations where it doesn't really work? So those critical questions, you have the ability to ask them, and you have the ability to understand the answers. You have the ability to understand the answers because you get a lot of doublespeak out there when you ask questions. You'll ask somebody a point blank question, they'll say, they'll give you a fallacy is what they'll do. And we'll talk about fallacies later on this semester. But they'll give you a fallacy and they'll tell you something that sounds okay, but really doesn't mean anything or doesn't mean what you're asking. And you just move on from there. Sometimes they do that on purpose, and sometimes they just don't know the answer, so they make it up. The other thing that you have to have is the desire to use these questions. The desire has to come from you. It can't be something that's automatic, because you're just going to be like everybody else and go along with the crowd. If I make a claim, if I tell you flat out that Democrats are pedophiles that are taking children, if you don't ask the questions, that means you're giving up your right to question it at all. You need to ask the questions to find out what's true. You have the desire to do that. And so these questions exist to provide direction for all the people who hear them. It begins with the desire to improve our thinking. They'll assist you when you react critically to an essay or evidence. They'll help you make qualitative judgments, and they'll help you form an argument, and we're going to talk about forming arguments in this class at a great length. And they'll help you write an essay. That's a pretty important thing here, by the way. You have 3 big ones coming up, so this is going to help you. You're going to have really good evidence for all of your claims. Critical thinking, again, consists of an awareness of a set of interrelated critical questions, plus the ability to ask and answer them at appropriate times. Okay, we talked about system 1 thinking. Now let's talk about 3-dimensional thinking. 3-dimensional thinking is kind of the counter to system 1 thinking. It's awareness of a set of interrelated critical questions. It's desire to actively use those questions, and the ability to ask and answer them in an appropriate manner. Now, some of you who are out there are pretty sharp people. You caught on to the fact that I just said this 3 times in a row, didn't I? 3 slides that had exactly the same 3 parts to 3-dimensional thinking. These are the 3 dimensions. This will be on your midterm. It may even be on your final. These 3 questions are key to this course. You probably want to recognize them. So here's a link that we could use to get to critical thinking. And it takes you to a place called changingminds.org, and it shows you all of the different types of Socratic questions. One type is for conceptual clarification. Why do you say that? What's the concept you're trying to give me? Probing assumptions. So somebody has assumptions. What else can we assume from that? Can you explain why this happens? Can you explain how that happens? Probing the rationale, reasons and evidence. Somebody gave you a claim that's based on their logic. Well, why does that happen? What's the nature of this? Are these reasons good enough? So you're going to be asking them, did they really use logic to come to their claim? You're going to question viewpoints and perspectives. So is there another way to look at this? The benefits from this. What are the benefits? Who benefits from it? Why is it better than some other alternative? How are this and that similar? How are different things similar? So you're questioning viewpoints and perspectives because, you know, the person that makes a claim has made that claim based on their own viewpoint, based on sometimes their own values, based on sometimes their own biases, but they're definitely making it from their point of view. You need to question to see if their point of view doesn't necessarily negate your point of view. There are consequential probings, and there are questions about the question. So you ask the question, so what's the point of asking it? Why are you asking that? Why did you want to know that information? What does that mean? So these are the different parts of Socratic questioning that you'll be using along in this course. Okay, so there are different ways of researching, aren't there? We're going to talk about 2 different ways because these are the 2 that we're concerned with, but there are many other ways. The 2 that we're talking about is the sponge and panning for gold method. So the sponge method is exactly what you think it is. Think of a bucket full of liquid, you put a sponge in, you pull the sponge out, and it's filled with water or whatever liquid happens to be in there. It absorbs, it enables a lot of understanding. So if you put that into a bucket of information, you're going to come out with a sponge full of information, a whole lot of good stuff. It may not be what you wanted, but it's a whole lot of good stuff. But it does enable better understanding. but it's passive. It's passive research. So you're going to just go get all the research you can find and throw it into your essay. That's not quite what we're looking for, but that's what a lot of people have a tendency to do. The other method is panning for gold. Now, many of you may have, in whatever grade it was, fourth, fifth, sixth grade, gone out to gold country here in California and done a panning trip. What they do is give you a little pie tin, I think, and they put you down by the brook and you kind of dig up some silt and sand and dirt and water and leaves and all the different things that are in that brook, and you start to turn the pan in a circle. You're kind of moving it in a circle. The reason for that is as the water moves around in that circle, it has a tendency to separate all the different things that are in that pan because they have different shapes and weights. And the water pressing against the different shapes and weights will kind of have a tendency to take all of those similar size, similar weight items and group them together so you can pick out the gold a lot easier. There's probably not a lot of gold still out there in the brooks, but they do that. But the analogy is real. This is how we would prefer to research, by panning. You do it by taking all the information and separating it. Kind of separating it by different types of information, different amounts of information, different quality information, and you go for the best, the very best information that will help you with the information you need to get. You get to choose what to absorb. You read it with an attitude. You question, you ask questions, you converse with the writer. Now, how do you do that? How do you converse with a writer who's probably not sitting next to you? Somebody writes a book, somebody writes an essay, they're probably not going to be sitting in the same room with you when you're reading it. Not physically, but they will be there with you rhetorically. Their words are there, and you can use those words like a detective would use evidence. You can go through those words and say, okay, she said this over here, and she said that over there, and with those two things put together, this is something I can derive from her point of view, or I can derive from her biases or her value set. It's interactive. You have to do it that way. You have to do interactive. You have to look at one piece of information that came to you from the writer and take another piece of information, or maybe the conglomeration of all the information that writer gave you, to kind of try to understand their point of view, who they are, what they feel, what they believe, their perspective, all the things that led to her writing this in such a fashion as she wrote it. Panning is so that's the preferred method of research. So it's interactive. It requires you to actually do something. It's not passive. You can't just dip your sponge in a bucket and come out with a whole bunch of information and think that that's going to do the job. You have to go through and actually analyze the information. Use your cognition to analyze the information to come up with your claim. Ask a number of questions. The objective is to critically evaluate the material and to form personal conclusions based on your evaluation of the material. You must be an active reader and listener. Does that make sense? You have to be active. What's an active reader? It's somebody who's asking questions of the text. Somebody that's reading that text and saying, wait a minute, what does that mean? Why did that author put that in here? What does that relate to? Or how does that part impact this other part I just read? You have to be an active reader and a listener. Okay, so there's one more thing that I really want to get to, and that's called weak sense thinking. Weak sense thinking when you're doing research is deadly, absolutely deadly. Weak sense critical thinking uses critical thinking to defend your current beliefs. It's there to find enough evidence to support what you've already decided the answer to the question is. If I say to you, do Black Lives Matter? Boom, you've got an answer in the back of your head. If you do, and you go out to research the answer to that question, you're probably going to only look for evidence that supports your predetermined answer. That's weak sense. You're not concerned with getting to the truth. You use this to dominate over people who disagree with you. You think of your typical debate where one person is given, right before the debate, they're given, here's your position to defend and here's the other person's position to defend. They may or may not believe each other's side, but they're going to go ahead and try to defend it and show off their skills of argument, their skills of argument. We're not looking for your skills of argument. We're looking for your skill in going out with an open mind, looking for the information and making your decisions based on the information that you analyze. So, strong sense uses those thinking skills to evaluate all the claims and beliefs, including your own. Believe me, you have to question your own beliefs, your own claims. You have to question your own claims. Force yourself to look critically at your own beliefs. Don't fool yourself into thinking that you're the smartest person on the planet. You might not be, and guess what? You might be wrong. So if you go into a question with the answer already in your back pocket and you start doing research, you will not find anything out there that supports the opposite of your own decision. But you already had that decision out there to begin with. So what are you doing? You're proving your own point, which may be wrong. Keep an open mind. Welcome criticism of your beliefs. Sometimes it's going to reinforce your beliefs. But make sure that when you go out to answer a question, to find the factual evidence, make sure you go out there without having first answered the question yourself. It's going to be hard sometimes. We're going to have some pretty strong feelings about current events. And by the way, our 3 essays will be about current events. So we're going to have feelings about them in some cases. You have to set those aside. Okay. You also have to set aside your own values, and that's hard to do. A lot of values can be based on experience. A lot of values can be based on culture. A lot of values can be based on your own religion. Can be based on just what you think is right and what you think is wrong. They're unstated ideas that people see as worthwhile. They provide a standard of conduct by which we measure the quality of human behavior. Your own values will drive your critical thinking to a large degree. Your willingness to argue for or against assisted suicide, for example, will be influenced by the degree to which you hold human life in terms of sanctity. So if you believe that human life is sacred, you're going to argue against assisted suicide based on that. So you see how values can play an important role in this. Your own values determine the standards of conduct you endorse and expect in other people as well. Primary values of a critical thinker. A real, true, honest-to-goodness critical thinker has the ability to make an informed, uncoerced decision. That's called autonomy. They make their decision based on analysis of the evidence, not based on what other people tell them to believe. Not based on what their upbringing tells them to believe, what their religion tells them to believe. They go out there and they make an informed decision based on the facts. You make a huge mistake if you listen only to those people who agree with you, by the way. Does that make sense? Sure. Critical thinkers have tremendous curiosity. You need to find out the truth. You want to learn. I ask you a question, and you take that question. By the way, the first question we're going to answer has something to do with social media. And the question is, what is the impact of social media on the mental health of Americans? That's a pretty big question. And that's a question you probably have something in your back pocket for me right now, but I don't want to hear it. I want you to research it. So you really need to listen. You want to learn. You want to find out what the impact is. If you don't, you will by the time you've written that essay. Critical thinkers have humility. That doesn't mean they're humiliated. That means they're humble. It means they don't know what the answers are, or they perhaps don't have the right answers. And they know that they're probably not right, or they might not be right. They're open-minded. They listen to read and read to learn. They finally have a respect for sound reasoning. They recognize sound reasoning. They respect sound reasoning. Allow your own reasoning to be questioned. Okay, conversationally speaking, we have to understand and assume the values of both the reader and the writer. We have to assume the values of both the reader and the writer. You have values and your reader has values. When you're doing research, that writer has values and you have values. We have to assume that. We have to understand that, and we have to try to find a common ground between the two. Did you ever hear the phrase, seek first to understand? You're going to hear that in Rogerian logic, by the way. Seek first to understand is a concept where before you try to come to a negotiation with someone or an agreement with someone, you first need to understand them, their point of view, how they come to that. And if you can understand them and they can understand you, then the two of you might be able to find common ground. Nothing happens until you find common ground in a negotiation. Isn't that true? Okay. So reader values will affect how the reader views the writing. Writer values, conversely, affect how the writers reach their conclusions. Conversations demand that we each consider the value of each other. Conversations, negotiated conversations, by the way, conversations are negotiated, demand that we each consider the values of the other. So, question successfully. What did that person intend? Did I hear you say the right thing? By the way, a Socratic question. Did I hear you say blah, blah, blah? Ask if they're open to change if the evidence is presented. Just say, listen, if I can show you a different way of thinking, are you open to that? Be open to it. Be willing to ask that question. Take the time to find the most dependable evidence. Take the time to find the most dependable evidence. Most of us, when we get an assignment to write an essay, we go out to the internet, we start finding information. That's all we need to do. We're just going to start cutting and pasting, maybe citation here, citation there. That's not what we want to do. What we want to do is actually go out and find the best information that answers the question in a logical fashion. Okay? And that's what critical thinkers do. They take the time to find the most dependable evidence. They search for common values, and they try to present a caring and a calm model. So the questions that I'm going to be asking can be fraught with tension, can be fraught with sometimes frustration, sometimes anger. Some of the questions cause anger. But what I want you to do is present your findings calmly and in a caring manner. You're not going to throw it in somebody's face. You're going to let them understand your thinking, let them see your evidence, and try to explain to them how you came to the conclusions that you came to. Caring. Okay,